All right, everybody, welcome back. This is the Horn Takes podcast, your very rough around the edges Texas sports talk destination. I'm your host, Sean Redfern. It's Deep Dive Tuesday, which makes it feel like it's later in the week, but it's not. So it's kind of like a cruel joke. We did Combination Monday yesterday where we slammed Monday and Tuesday shows together, basically, because we're on a short week. We're on a short week. We're going to deep dive today, which we would normally do on a Thursday, and then we'll have Prediction Thursday, which we would normally do on a Friday. That will make sure I can get all my content up for you guys before we catch a plane early on Saturday morning to head to Arlington. Actually, we're heading to Dallas. We'll wind up in Arlington for the Big 12 championship game. We know games are not played on paper, but we care about the paper anyway. And that's what Deep Dive is all about. We'll do the deep dive on the Okie State game today. We'll have Sean's 4 big questions of the game. Aggy has their man, but is it a good hire? We'll talk about it a little bit. Check us out on Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, at Horn Takes. Guys, if everybody on my TikTok will just go over to the YouTube button right there in my bio on TikTok, click it and hit subscribe, man, I would be doing all right. I would appreciate that. If you guys just like to listen to podcasts, sit around all day on the weekend in your chair listening to podcasts, check us out at horntakespodcast.buzzsprout.com or anywhere you listen to podcasts. All right, let's get into this deep dive on Oklahoma State. Offensively, we always start offensively because we're offensive. Rushing offense, Texas is averaging 188 yards per game. Their opponents on average this season are only giving up 156 yards per game. So they have a plus 33 offensive rushing margin. That's really good. Oklahoma State rushing the ball for 167 yards a game. Their opponents on average give up 154 yards per game. They've got a plus 14 offensive rushing margin, which is also good. I think anytime on any of these offensive categories you land in the plus, I think that's solid. If you land in the minus on an offensive category, that's not very good because that means you're performing under the average of all of your opponents up to that point in this season. Conversely, on the defensive side, you want negative numbers. If you got positive numbers, you're giving up more yards than your opponents on average or more points than your opponents on average. Passing offense, Texas 272 yards per game. Their opponents are only giving up 227 yards per game. Texas has a plus 45 offensive passing margin. Oklahoma State, about even. 265 yards per game. Opponents giving up 231 yards per game. They have a plus 34 offensive passing margin. So still pretty good, right? Scoring offense. Texas averaging 34 points a game. Their opponents only giving up 26 points a game. Texas has a plus 9 offensive scoring margin. I think that's pretty good. That's like almost, that's a 2-score game. I think that's where you want to be, if not better. Oklahoma State averaging 30 yards per game on scoring offense. Their opponents giving up 26 yards per game on defense. That is a plus 4 offensive scoring margin. And by the way, folks, I apologize. This is the time of year where I get all gummed up and my throat is all full of crap and I can't do anything about it. Actually, I stay that way most of the time, but definitely this time of year, I don't know why necessarily, but it gets me. Sacks allowed. Texas is giving up 25 sacks on the season. Oklahoma State only 12, and I think that's a significant number, and I think that's could be a significant driver of how this game might go. Tackles for loss allowed. Texas is allowed 53. Oklahoma State is allowed 60. Turnovers lost. Texas has lost the ball 15 times this season. Oklahoma State only 17 times this season. So you look at offensively, Texas has every single category there pretty much hemmed up. Defensively, and I think this is really where Texas separates themselves on paper from Oklahoma State. Rushing defense, Texas only giving up 85 yards a game, Their opponents are rushing the ball for 152 yards per game. They have a minus 67 defensive rushing margin, that's substantial. That's half to over half of what a lot of teams average on them by themselves, and they're doing that. They're doing that less than their opponent's average. Oklahoma State giving up 172 yards per game on the ground. Their opponents, on average, rush the ball for 173 yards per game. So they have a very slim -1 defensive rushing margin. Passing defense, not a huge difference between these two teams in the amount of yards they give up, but when you start looking at the margins, spaces out a little bit. Texas giving up 240 yards per game through the air. Their opponents average 244 yards per game, so they have a -4 defensive passing margin, which is not great. And Texas was actually positive last week for the first time in this margin. And that's just due to a few games here lately where they just could not stop anybody through the air. They did a really good job against Texas Tech, only giving up 88 yards through the air in that game. Oklahoma State passing defense gives up 251 yards per game. Their opponents, however, only average 238 yards per game. So they've got a +14 defensive passing margin, and that is not good. Scoring defense, Texas giving up 17 points a game. Their opponents score 30 points a game, so they have a -13 defensive scoring margin. Oklahoma State giving up 10 more points a game, 27. Their opponents score 29 points a game, so they have a -2 defensive scoring margin. Sacks, Texas with 31 sacks on the season, 4 better than they were last year, so the improvement is there. Oklahoma State, 24 sacks. Okay. I mean, I think you look at Oklahoma State, they've got 2 more games. What are they averaging right? They're averaging 2 a game right now. They're going to end up roughly 28. Not that great. That's 1 better than Texas was last year, and Texas was pretty bad. Actually, I wouldn't say Texas was really bad. I'd say Texas was middle of the road, just kind of mid, as the kids say. It was just mid. No cap. Tackles for loss. Texas with 80 tackles for loss. Oklahoma State with 74, and that's a lot. Both those teams, that's a lot of tackles for loss. Turnovers forced. Texas has forced 21, so they have a +6 turnover margin. Oklahoma State's forced 20 turnovers, so they have a +3. So both teams in the plus. Texas slightly better. Strength of schedule. According to Sagarin, Texas's latest strength of schedule is 77.1, which is good for second best in the country. Their opponents' average strength of schedule is 73.8, which would be good for 39th best in the country. Oklahoma State with a 74.2 rating on Sagarin, which is good for 30th strength of schedule in the country. Their opponents' average strength of schedule is 72.3, which is good enough for 50th in the country. So, like most of the season, Texas with a kind of a decided advantage from a strength of schedule perspective. They've played tougher teams. The teams they've played have played tougher teams than almost every single opponent Texas has played this year. Texas has a huge advantage in this game statistically. I mean, they lead in all 6 major categories. offensive rushing, passing, scoring, defensive rushing, passing, scoring, as well as every single one of those margins. There's only one category that Oklahoma State actually is better on paper than Texas, and that's sacks allowed. They're tied for 9th in the country with just those 12 sacks they've given up this season. You look at this statistical advantage, and you got to say, you know, man, this could be a rough game for Oklahoma State. This is the type of game Texas should go out and dominate, right? I mean, the spread, I think, has moved now to -15. At least that's what it was this morning. That's a big number in a championship game. And it looks like the type of game, just statistically, where that could certainly come true. But these games are not played on paper. We know this. We know this. I always go back to anytime I start to see fans get overconfident about anything, especially Texas fans, it always makes me think about the 2001 Texas team. 2001 Texas team beat Colorado 41-7 in Austin during the regular season. Just an ass kicking. And that was kind of midway through the season. And then later in the season, Colorado really just kind of changed up their identity and went with this whole like 3 tight end package. We're just going to run the football out of the I formation with 3 tight ends, unbalanced lines. And man, I can't believe I forgot the name of that running back, but he had himself just some hellified games late in that season. They beat Nebraska late in the season that year. That's what got them into the Big 12 championship game. They just completely changed what they did. And nothing changed other than their philosophy, but the teams, the rosters, still the same. Statistically, some things probably changed. But same teams. And they meet in the Big 12 championship game. And Texas has everything on the line in this game. Somebody had beat somebody, and Texas was in line to go play for the national championship. I remember sitting in the stadium, looking up in suites and watching the game on these sweet TVs. Man, I forgot. Was it? It would have been the SEC championship game, but I can't remember who was playing who. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Texas has all this stuff out in front of them. They go in there and lose 39-37 to the same team they just absolutely stroked by 34 points. So, paper, again, games on paper can give us an idea. They might tell us what we could expect. A lot of times they're close, but not always. I am not sleeping on Oklahoma State. I think Oklahoma State's in the Big 12 championship game for a reason. They found ways to win games. They've been down late the last 2 games. Down big. Figured out ways to get themselves back in the game and win those games. I mean, really, there's 2 blemishes on this team's record this season, in my opinion. They're both losses, obviously, and they're both bad losses. South Alabama mashed them early in the season, 33-7, I think. University of Central Florida, what was it, 41-7? Just absolute. I mean, they killed them. It was on the road. It was in a monsoon during the first half. Lots of turnovers for Oklahoma State. I mean, just like your perfect nightmare. Perfect storm, worst nightmare type scenario for Oklahoma State. But they beat some good teams. They beat Iowa State. They beat Kansas State. They beat Oklahoma. I'm not sure about this game. Again, I mean, not saying I'm not sure Texas can win it. I just don't know that despite this big disparity in all of these statistical categories. I'm not sure it ain't rat poison. We'll find out in a few days for sure. Sean's 4 big questions of the game. A lot like one of last week's keys to the game. This one's a question. Can Texas slow down the nation's leading rusher? Ollie Gordon comes into this game with almost 1,600 yards. I believe he's at 1,580 yards on the season. 20 rushing touchdowns. Big part of their offense, obviously. Texas defense ranked 4th in the nation in rushing defense, 85 yards per game. They've only given up 7 rushing touchdowns all season. And that's pretty damn good. They held Taj Brooks last week to less than 100 yards. They've only given up 2 100-yard rushers all season. One of them was a quarterback, Dylan Gabriel from Oklahoma. And Dylan Gabriel really did that on, it wasn't like a consistent thing. It wasn't like, to me, there's like big plays, right? And you go, okay, well, that's a big play. You know, he didn't consistently beat us. Kind of like what Wyoming did. Wyoming was one of those 100-yard rushers was from Wyoming. And the very first play of the game, they had the ball. He ripped off, I think it was a 75-yard touchdown run. He didn't do much else the rest of the game. I think he got 30 more yards the rest of the game. Still a 100-yard rusher, but a different 100-yard rusher than a guy that's just picking up 3, 4, 5 yards per carry, like every single carry. So Dylan Brooks picks up his 100 yards Dylan Gabriel, rather, picks up his 100 yards just off of a couple of really big scrambles. Still hurt Texas, obviously, but the other was, again, the kid from Wyoming. So they held Taj Brooks to under 100. And, man, I know I've been talking about, Taj Brooks is a damn good back. I don't know where he came from. I don't know his story. I know he's big. He's physical. He's tough to tackle. If Texas Tech could stay in a game, which they do a lot of games, and just keep pounding him, I guarantee you people get tired of attacking that son of a bitch, especially those defensive backs that have to come up and meet him after he's got a 5, 6, 7 yard head start. I guarantee you those dudes don't want to have anything to do with that shit by the end of a game. Ricky Williams used to be the guy that, he would just wear defenses out. And there's a lot of other backs, but I obviously remember Ricky Williams. Those dudes didn't want to tackle him no more. You can tell when someone doesn't want to tackle somebody. I think Texas is so good at run defense partly because they don't mind coming up and tackling somebody. And they get there in a group. And they get there in a hurry. We'll see what they can do against Ollie Gordon. Ollie Gordon, very talented. That offensive line obviously has to be pretty good. He's not doing 1,600 yards by himself. Question number 2, can Coach Sark break the Gundy curse? Coach Gundy's the only coach in the Hateful Eight that Coach Sark has not beaten. 2021, Sark's very first year at Texas, they led 24-16, headed into the fourth quarter. They gave up 16 fourth quarter points to lose that one 32-16. Last season, they led 31-17 with 3 minutes and 38 seconds to go in the second quarter. End up losing that game 41-34. And to me, that was a tough one. I don't so much remember all the details of the 2021. I definitely remember last year's because they ran the ball so well in the first half. And they just kept getting themselves in bad situations with procedure penalties. Kept having to throw the ball. And Quinn Ewers just wasn't there. Wasn't it? That was painful watching that lead erode, watching that game turn out the way it turned out. And then Texas only won 3 of the last 10 games against Mike Gundy and those Oklahoma State Cowboys. So a lot of stuff going against, just from a juju perspective, just from a curse perspective, a lot of stuff going against Sark and the Longhorns this weekend. Can the Texas defense find a way to get to Alan Bowman? Can they get him on the ground with the ball in his hands? Like we said earlier, Oklahoma State's only given up 12 sacks all season. I think a big part of that is because they run the ball so well. I think part of that is because when they pass, they probably get the ball out pretty quickly. Alan Bowman's like a Texas Tech. I'll call him a reject, and I don't mean that negatively. Texas Tech's probably one of the most interesting quarterback schools because so many guys leave from Tech and go become starters other places. Some of them very, 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 very successfully became starters other places. And then they've had their fair share of really good quarterbacks that have sort of survived the mosh pit of trying to be a Texas Tech quarterback. It's really, I'm not going to say it doesn't happen like that at other schools, but I don't remember any other schools that have had that many quarterbacks sort of get rejected by a school and go to other schools and do so well. Maybe that's an off-season project. But anyway, back to Alan Bowman. He's a Texas Tech guy. He's an air raid guy. So I don't know. I think a lot of their pass plays are I haven't got to see him play that much this season. But I think a lot of it's probably quick stuff. Get the ball out of his hands. One read type stuff. And then the other part of those 12 sacks, I think the offensive line is just probably good at what they do. That's like 1 sack per game. It's pretty incredible. On the other side, Texas is obviously much improved this season, getting home on their pass rushes. Last year, they were one of the best I think they were the best team in the country at getting pressure on the quarterback. But like we said, they were just kind of middle of the road on actually finishing and getting sacks. This year, they're already 4 sacks better than they were last season. I think a lot of this is a big production jump from the edge. We talked all last season about the edge guys just not getting home, just not being quite what they needed to be. Almost all the pressure for Texas last year and almost all the sacks for Texas last year came up the middle. Whether it was the interior defensive line or linebacker blitzes up the middle. So last year, the edges had 8.5 sacks combined. This year, they've got 13.5 sacks combined. And then I think you throw in the dynamic of Anthony Hill Jr., who's a very good pass rusher, and his 4 sacks. And the cool thing about Anthony Hill is he can come at you from all directions. He can line up as an edge guy and get off the edge just like a normal edge rusher would. He can line up at the linebacker position and blitz you and get to you. He can spy you and run you down on the sidelines. Anthony Hill might be the best young linebacker to go through Texas since Derek Johnson. And there's been a lot of good linebackers come through Texas since Derek Johnson. So can they get him to the ground with a ball in his hands? We only have 4 days to wait and see. Can Texas continue? This is question number 4, folks. Back up. Stop. Question number 4, can Texas continue to produce big numbers on the ground with their number 1 running back, Jonathan Brooks, sitting out? We all know Brooks goes down in the fourth quarter of the TCU game with a torn ACL. Since then, you've had prior number one, most of the season backup, Cedric Baxter go for 100 yards. Last weekend, you had Jaden Blue go for 100 yards. And this team's rushed for 425 yards in 2 games since Jonathan Brooks went out. Last weekend was amazing. You got to see Trey Wisner. I think Trey Wisner, he had like 60-something yards in 2 drives. And then we got to see Savion Red be successful running the football. Had a couple nice long runs. We're talking about like, those are like the 5th and 6th guys on the depth chart coming into this season. You flip it over to Oklahoma State defensively against the run. They're 102nd in the nation against the run. So, I mean, they're giving up 172 yards per game. They got a plus 14 defensive rushing margin, which we've talked about is bad to be positive on the defensive margins. I think this is a tough matchup for Oklahoma State. And the problem is Oklahoma State has a very, very, very good running back. So he's a problem, right? Like, you got to figure out, you got to be sound up front. You got to make tackles when you get to him. You want to try to bottle him up before he can get all that stuff. Like, we get it. The problem for Oklahoma State is Texas has a lot of really good running backs. And I mean that seriously. Like, these guys that Texas has on their roster could all go start at other Power 5 schools. Maybe not the upper echelon of Power 5 schools right today. I think they all have the talent that they could do that in the future. But I'm saying if these guys were to transfer out, they would all go to a Power 5 school and they would all start immediately. That's how good this Texas running back room is. So I don't know. The question is, can they? Looking at it statistically, it absolutely looks like they can. We'll have to see again. Aggie head coaching clown show. I didn't get to keep up with all this, but it seems there was a massive circus going on all weekend that included, like, Mike Stoops definitely being the next head coach at Texas A&M, to suddenly Mike Stoops will not be the next coach at Texas A&M. There was rumors out there about, there's rumors out there just about everybody. I mean, Dabo Swinney was one of them. And I don't know, there's a lot of people just starting rumors just to start rumors, especially on Twitter. Twitter, y'all, is a cesspool. I mean, if you've lived this long without getting on Twitter, I just wouldn't even get on there, especially if you're trying to get, like, sports news or really any kind of news. It's all bullshit. And I say that as a long-time, like, college football message boarder guy. I thought they were bad. Like, Twitter, you just can't believe anything you see on Twitter. But, however, there was all this noise out there about all these quarterbacks, and all these coaches possibly being the coach for Texas A&M. I think a lot of candidates obviously had to tell them no. I don't think Elko was their first guy. The Mike Stoops thing is interesting because it almost sounds like what happened was the administration was all on board, but then the boosters caught wind of it and shit canned that deal before it got done. Man, I'll tell you what, if someone that was plugged into all that stuff could write a book about all these big major coaching searches and really tell us what's really going on behind the scenes, I think that book would sell I think that book would sell more copies than the Bible. I think there's so many college football fans out there that would just love to really know all the details about what happens. I may try to write this book. I don't know. I have zero connections, so it'll probably be pretty tough. But I might give it a whirl. Who knows? That might be my life's work, my masterpiece. Anyways, they have their man. It's announced Monday. Mike Elko is named the head coach down in Colleyville. Mike Elko is no stranger to Colleyville and all their weird traditions like dancing arm to arm, shoulder to shoulder, in opposite directions depending on which row you're on, and singing weird songs about Texas. He's no stranger to that. And that's what they did. That's what they did at some point during this press conference. The Aggies are just weird, man. I don't know. Anyway, Mike Elko was the defensive coordinator under Jimbo Fisher from 2018 to 2021. So he's got some knowledge of what goes down there in Aggieville, Colleyville, College Station, Aggie Land. Been the head coach at Duke for the last 2 seasons. 16-9 record sounds pretty good. And you got to go all the way back to 2018 to find 16 wins prior to his arrival. So you got to count up the 2018 season, the 2019 season, the 2020 season, and the 2021 season. And it's a little over 16 games that he's won in 2 seasons. So that sounds pretty promising, right? I mean, he had Duke in the top 15 at least this season. Was a couple games away from, I mean, they played some close games against some good teams. They beat Clemson. They had Notre Dame on the ropes, and man, that's just a crazy ending to that game. I think they had a pretty big lead on Florida State going into the 4th quarter and just couldn't hang on. So it seems like he knows how to turn around a program pretty quickly, and that's something that this Aggie program definitely needs after being just 4 games above 500 over the last 3 seasons. So like on the surface, you got to go, man, that sounds like a pretty decent hire. You know, he knows the place. He knows how to sway back and forth and sing the songs. Been a coach there. You don't have to give him a map to like show him where stuff is. He already knows where stuff's at. But if you really dig into these 16 wins he had while he was at Duke, I mean, not really impressive to me at all. Let's check out these 16 wins. They beat Temple. Temple was 3-9 that season. They beat Northwestern. Northwestern was 1-11 that season. They beat NC and NCA&T maybe. I don't know. It's an FCS school. Who gives a fuck? They beat them. University of Virginia, they beat them. They were 3-9 that season. They beat Miami the season they were 5-7. They beat Boston College during a year when they were 3-8. They beat Virginia Tech during a year when they were 3-8. Wake Forest, they beat them once when they were 8-5. They beat them again when they were 4-8. They did get a win over University of Central Florida when they were 9-5. They beat another FCS school, Lafayette. They beat UConn when they were 3-9. They beat Northwestern when they were 7-5. They beat NC State when they were 9-3. Pitt when they were 3-9, and Clemson when they were 8-4. So only 4 of his 16 wins at Duke were against teams with winning records at the FBS level. There was the 2 FCS teams he beat. You look at the combined record of FBS opponents that he's beaten while he was at Duke, 64-80 were those teams. Well below 500. listen, I'm not gonna like Bill Lucci it up. I'm not gonna Luch it up and claim that this was a bad hire like Luch did about Steve Sarkisian back in 2020 or 2021. I'm not gonna do that. But at least on the surface, to me, like, and when you, I mean, just not even, okay, it's not on the surface, but it's like just below the surface. You don't have to dig that hard to find it. It just doesn't seem like all that great of a hire to me, especially when you're talking about one of the best jobs in college football, which a lot of guys, a lot of talking heads seem to think A&M is. And there's a lot of, I mean, I'm not arguing that it's not. I'm just saying, like, is it really? I mean, there's a lot of stuff there. There's money. There's facilities. They have a very passionate fan base. I think they have boosters that are on board and want the programs to be really good. So they've got that kind of support, right? It's in a fertile recruiting ground. They're in a good conference. Those are all the pros. I think the cons are they have no tradition of winning anything at all. They have really unrealistic expectations based off of things they've never done. So I don't know how great the Texas A&M job is, but if it is so great, why can't they find a great coach? Are they the most unlucky? Are they the most unlucky football program in the history of sports? I don't know. But Aggie's got their guy, and we'll find out. And listen, again, I'm not trying to say it's not a good hire. He may do a great job there. Sometimes it's the hires you don't expect that turn into big deal. I mean, there was a lot of Texas fans when Mac Brown got hired that were pretty pissed off. They're pretty upset. Mac Brown led Texas football through one of the greatest eras of Texas football history. So who knows? Maybe Mike Elko is going to be, Texas A&M's Mac Brown. I don't know. We'll find out, obviously. Some of the 2024 SEC schedule was made a little bit clearer yesterday. I don't know where all this comes from, but it's out there. And it's actually not just a tweet, which again is a cesspool. It's actually on like legit news media outlet, like sports media outlets. So just some notable games for Texas. Georgia at Texas on October 19th. So we knew Georgia was coming. We knew Florida was coming. I believe Mississippi State is coming. Maybe Vanderbilt. Florida Gators are coming. Now we know what weekend for Georgia. Same weekend as the damn F1 race. So congratulations, scheduler guys. Austin's a pretty big city. It's not that fucking big, people. Like, people come from all over the world to watch these damn F1 races. And thank God I found a hotel for, I would say, reasonable. It's not like good by any stretch. It's not where I would prefer to be, but it's not far from the stadium. It's an easy drive, 15, 20-minute drive from the burbs of Austin. But if you plan on going to that game in Austin, I would suggest buying, renting, booking a hotel immediately. If you don't plan on going, but you think you might go, I suggest booking a hotel immediately, just making sure you got some flexible options for cancellation there. Because the prices right now are stupid, and as more and more rooms get booked up, they're going to get nothing but more stupid. So anyways, fuck you SEC scheduler people. If if you're scheduling games in Austin, there might be some other shit going on. Austin's just a little bit bigger than Tuscaloosa, a little bit bigger than Starkville. Like, I think the only comparison in the SEC is Vanderbilt sitting over there in Nashville. Like, would you schedule a huge matchup in Vanderbilt, which there'll never be a huge matchup in Vanderbilt, but let's assume they're like a top 5 team one day. Would you schedule a big matchup in Nashville when like the biggest other thing in Nashville was happening? No, you wouldn't, because that'd be stupid. Wake up, schedulers for the SEC. Texas at Arkansas, November 16th. And then Texas at Aggie down in Colleyville on November 30th, which is a little bit of a difference in what they used to do. Texas A&M and Texas played a lot of games on Thanksgiving, played a lot of games the day after Thanksgiving. I wouldn't swear they've never played on Saturday after Thanksgiving, but I don't remember it happening. So that'll be a little bit different. But Texas will finally have a rival, a real rival. And I say that really loosely, folks. A&M is barely a rival, and we'll talk about that at some other point. But at least it's not like Tech. So, point being, Texas will kind of be part of rivalry weekend again on rivalry weekend, which is exciting. I don't know how the hell Texas at Michigan. And by this list was not just like conference SEC games. This were notable games involving SEC teams. I don't know how Texas and Michigan on September 7th didn't make that list as a notable game. That's definitely going to be a top 10 matchup in Ann Arbor. There's a good chance that it's a top 5 matchup in Ann Arbor. And it could pit 2 2023 playoff teams against each other in week 2 of the 2024 season. So I don't mind flying under the radar, I guess, but like I don't know how that didn't make the list. That's pretty notable to me. Check us out on Thursday. We will have Prediction Thursday. We'll do Trace Ultra Games, the championship week edition. I have not decided if we're going to break protocol and actually do all 4 championship games or if we're just going to do 3 of them. We'll do 4 keys and a prediction for the Big 12 championship game against Oklahoma State. Check out the podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can find us on Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube at Horn Takes. Please follow and subscribe. Will not cost you guys a thing. We appreciate the support. You can email me at horntakespodcast@gmail.com with all your questions, comments, concerns, and criticisms. I love them all. You guys have a good Tuesday. Get hooked.